Hey, friends, real quick. If you are going to NCECA, come find me. Number one, I love meeting people, and I am a hugger, so tell me if you're not ahead of time. But also, I've got some free stickers to hand out with our favorite meaningful tagline printed on them to remind us all when we're together and when we're apart on the fun and the hard days that together we've got this. I can't wait to see you in Detroit. I have to tell you something that's been on my mind ever since we wrapped up the pricing masterclass and a couple of follow-up Q&A sessions inside of the community last month. I kept hearing a version of the same question over and over again. Can I do this? Is it okay if am I allowed to? And every single time, I wanted to reach through the screen and lovingly shake my fellow makers and say, yes, you can. It's your business. You can do pretty much within legal reason whatever you want. And that is what we're going to talk about today on this solo episode of The Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. As always, I'm your host, Rebecca Ickes-Kara, and I promise I'm going to try very hard not to turn this into a lecture, but I make no guarantees. So, pricing. Now, like I said, we had a whole masterclass on this. The recording's in the community, so you can always come watch it. But if you weren't there, we spent a big chunk of time digging into the how of pricing your work. Yes, of course, the math around that, but also equally important, the mindset. And then in the Q&A sessions afterwards, I noticed something interesting happening that I alluded to in the beginning of this episode. People started asking for permission. Not explicitly. No one said, Rebecca, may I please raise my prices? But that's essentially what a lot of the questions boiled down to. Can I charge differently for one custom order to the next? Can I charge differently for custom orders versus things I have ready to ship? Is it okay if I sell all of my work at only one price point? Is it okay? What if I want to? What if? Can I? Is it okay? And here's what I realized. Somewhere along the way, whether it was from a course that we took or a podcast that we listened to or an influencer we follow or just the general noise of the internet, a lot of us have gotten the idea that there is a right way to run a small maker, creative, artisan business. That someone somewhere has the answer, the formula, the system. And if we just find that person, and if we follow it closely, we will get the result that we're looking for. And I have some good news for you and some bad news about all of that. So let's start with the bad news. That's not how business works. Sorry. There's no universally right answer. There is no formula that works the same way for every maker in every market, in every country, around the world, at every stage of life and business. But the good news is, that means you are actually totally in charge. Now, I realize that might not sound like good news to some of you. That might be the part that's actually overwhelming. It is your business. Or side hustle. A side hustle where you're selling your work is still a business, my friends. You get to decide. You don't need my permission, or anyone else's for that matter. Now I know, for some of you, this is incredibly comforting. But for others, it's maybe the most terrifying thing that I could say. Because the flip side of you can do whatever you want, and I really can't say that phrase without wanting to sing it. You can do whatever you like. Okay, anyways, the flip side of you being in charge is that there's no one to tell you what to do. And that can feel really lonely and really overwhelming really fast. So let me offer you a different framework, one that I think is actually more useful than looking for the quote-unquote right answer. I want you to try and think of your business or side hustle. Your side hustle is still a business. I want you to try and think of this as a science experiment. Trust me, stay with me here. Remember the scientific method that we all learned back when we were kids. Hypothesis, test, analyze, new hypothesis. Test, analyze, over and over and over again, right? It's not glamorous. In fact, you might have been bored by it in school, and it's definitely not fast. But it is how we actually learn what is true, and not what we think is true, or what we hope is true, or what we feel in just this exact moment to be true, or what some person on the internet told us was true. Our businesses and side hustles work the same way. For example, I think if I've raised my prices by 20%, I'll lose customers. Or rather, I think if I raise my prices by 20%, I am scared of losing customers, right? That's a hypothesis. So test it. Analyze what actually happens. And then form a new hypothesis based on actual information and test again. Now, I realize I just said test it. Like, it's the simplest thing in the world. Just go test it. And I want to acknowledge something especially important, because if I don't, I'm going to sound like every other online business coach who has clearly forgotten what it's actually like to be in the trenches of trying to start and run a creative business. If you're a full-time maker, if the sales of the work that you make are what pays your rent or mortgage, buys your groceries, keeps the lights on, me saying, just test it, is not nearly as easy as the high-pitched voice I just said that in. In fact, it is actually scary. Like, genuinely keep you up at 3 a.m. What if this doesn't work? And that means I can't afford to get it wrong because then I will be kicked out on the street. Kind of scary. And I'm not glossing over that. I'm not pretending that that's not very, very real. So let me give you some options about what testing it, I don't know why I keep saying that in such a high voice, but what that could actually look like when your livelihood is reliant upon this. Testing it doesn't mean blowing everything up all at once and completely changing your business model overnight. It does not mean swearing off mugs forever because you're really tired of making them. And it doesn't necessarily even mean that raising all of your prices by 20% tomorrow and hoping for the best. Instead, when I say treat your business like a science experiment, consider it a controlled science experiment. The best of scientists make sure they're only changing one variable at a time so that they can actually track what has changed or not, right? So maybe, instead of never making another mug again because you are totally tired of them, you gradually make fewer of them, which frees up your time to finally make that new item that you've been thinking about for months. Maybe you make the same number of mugs this month, but next month you make 10 less, or 5, whatever number you can stomach. And then pay attention. Do you get more questions from people who ask when they're out of stock? Do your sales dip? Do you manage to finally start making those lidded jars you've been thinking about for ages but never had time to actually prototype and test out? And do you sell those faster than you thought that you might? Do you feel a sense of relief that surprises you because you have 5 or 10 less mugs to make and actually have the time to explore and play around with new ideas? Any of that and all of that is data. So let's take the raising your prices example. Instead of raising all of your prices, maybe you just pick 2 or 3 pieces. Maybe it's the ones that sell the best and you run out of the fastest. Maybe instead it's the ones that take you the longest to make and you should probably really raise those prices so you're paying yourself more than minimum wage. Start with just 1 or 2 items, maybe. Watch what happens. You notice whether people hesitate, whether they still buy, whether they say anything at all. And if it works, then maybe you raise a couple more items as well, or a couple more after that. Or maybe it's not a 20% jump. Maybe instead it's $1. And the next time you sell out, it's another $1. And the next time you sell out, it's another $1. There is no right or wrong here. Do what you can manage to make yourself comfortable with, because I realize raising our prices anytime, no matter the amount, is always scary. So comfort maybe is not exactly the right word. But if you can take a half step outside of your comfort zone instead of a giant leap outside of it, that's still moving forward. This is still the scientific method. It's just a more careful version of it. One that respects the reality that for a lot of us, this isn't a hobby that has a safety net. It is our livelihood. And protecting that livelihood while still moving forward, still experimenting, still growing, still testing. That's not being timid or not taking a leap or whatever other tech bro hustle harder term you want to put in here. No, instead it's just being smart. The goal isn't being reckless. The goal is movement forward, small, intentional, eyes open, in a direction that you actually choose. And on the flip side of all of this, and I say this with so much love, please hear it with so much love and appreciation. If you are not a full-time maker, if you still have a day job or a partner's income, a safety net of any kind, that, my friends, is an enormous gift. And I really want you to see it that way. Because one of the biggest advantages of not yet relying on your pottery sales to cover your health insurance is that you can experiment freely and relatively consequence-free, which I realize is a big statement. If I were to say, who cares if you don't sell that well at next weekend's market? Well, I know you care. Of course you care. It sucks to sit at a market that is slow for even an hour, let alone a whole weekend. It's demeaning. It can feel incredibly defeating to pack up a full booth at the end of a slow day and drive home with basically everything you came with. I know the feeling, trust me. It's demoralizing in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't ever put themselves out there. However, when I say consequence-free, what I'm really talking about is you are still going to pay your electricity bill. If you experiment at your next market and the experiment doesn't work, you're going to be okay, right? If you still want to go out to dinner to treat yourself and make yourself feel better, you can do that and not necessarily worry about the economic consequences. And that's pretty remarkable if you think about it. It means you get to try things. You get to test a new price point or a new product or a new display or a new market entirely. And if it flops, well, it's not wasted time because inevitably you are going to learn something from that experience. And then you're going to have to pick yourself up and go back to work on Monday. That's not a consolation prize. It is, in fact, a competitive advantage. And honestly, staying in that day job a little bit longer than you'd like, keeping that safety net intact while you figure out what actually does work best for you uniquely, well, that's probably part of the reason that you're keeping that job, right? Not just for the healthcare and the steady paycheck, but because it gives you the freedom to still be figuring this thing out without the pressure of it having to work out, right? Without it feeling like every decision is the end all be all. Use that freedom, my friends. Experiment. Let things fail. It's not wasted time. You're just gathering data to go back, create a new hypothesis, test it, and gather more data. That way, later on, when maybe the stakes are higher, you've got a lot of data to look back at and make a really informed decision. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not just saying wing it and hope for the best and see what happens. Who cares if you fail? That's not exactly what I mean either. What I mean is that the people who have been doing this longer than you, the makers who are 5, 10, 15, 20 years into building their businesses, they have something incredibly valuable to offer. But it's not the right answer, always. It's only their answers, their experience, their mistakes, their hard-won perspective on what worked and what didn't, and what they wish someone had told them earlier. That's part of what I love so much about having these Q&A conversations in the community, because all of us, whether new to business or 15-year veterans like myself, we all have different experiences. We're selling at different shows. We're in different countries. We're in different regions of the world. Different things work. So while I might say, I don't know that I would offer a discount because that can train an audience of people to be used to discounts and then it might be hard to sell at full price, somebody else can chime in and say, actually, I ran a discount at a show once and it worked wonders to clear out my shelves of stuff that I didn't want to have to deal with anymore. Both answers are correct. You just get to choose what's best for yourself. This is also the wonderful thing about having separate time to work through the educational information we learn in a masterclass. It's not just a quick 10 minutes at the end of a presentation for any questions, but it's actually dedicated time, sometimes weeks later, to sit down together, throw ideas around, talk about specific situations, and get real feedback. Because there's a huge difference between learning something and actually putting it into practice in your specific business, with your specific customers, and your specific stage of life or making. And in the sessions that we have, I love when someone says, okay, but what if I tried this? Now, that type of question is actually the scientific method in action. That's someone testing their hypothesis out loud, sharing it with fellow colleagues and makers in a safe space before they go out into the real world and run the experiment. It's a chance to get a gut check, maybe get some feedback from people who have tried something similar before, catch a flaw in your thinking that you weren't considering before, and hopefully save time or money in case of any mistakes, quote unquote mistakes. That's different, though, from asking permission. Asking for permission sounds like, is this the right way to do it? Am I doing it right? Whereas thinking like a scientist sounds like, here's what I want to try. Here's why I think it might work. What am I missing? Do you hear the difference? Because one puts the authority outside of you. The other keeps it with you, where it belongs, while still leaving room to learn from people who've been down a similar road. So, the next time you find yourself asking, can I do this? Am I allowed? Is this okay? I want you to go back to whatever the this was, and I want you to sit with it for a second. Why do you want to do it? What was the outcome that you're hoping for? Is there a small, low-risk way to test it and see what happens before you go all in? Because the literal answer to can I do this is almost always yes. You can do a lot of things. Yes, you can charge more for custom work. Yes, you can raise your prices. Yes, you can stop selling at a price point that isn't working for you. And yes, you can try a new platform, or you can give up social media, or you can skip an email list, or you can do something differently than what you see people do online. You don't need my permission. You don't need anyone's permission, in fact. It is your business. And it's still a business if it's a side hustle. What you do need is a willingness to try things. Pay attention to what happens. Dare I suggest, track it in some kind of a way, maybe a system, and keep adjusting. You need patience with the process because the scientific method is not fast. And maybe you need a community of people who will help you think through these experiments, celebrate the ones that work, and figure out where the learning opportunities are with the ones that don't. You definitely need to get comfortable with the fact that there is not a finish line where you'll finally have all the answers and be quote unquote ready and no longer have to figure things out. Because let me tell you, 15 years later, I'm still constantly having to figure things out. That's just business. And frankly, also life. So here's my encouragement to you. Whatever that thing is that you've been sitting on, maybe it's pricing, maybe it's a new product you want to make, maybe it's a totally different way of telling people about you exist or giving up something as well. Go try it. You don't have to stick with it forever. And of course, if you want to gut check first, if you want to ask people who have been around a little bit longer and see if they have any experience, ask around. Ask a maker friend that you trust. And if you don't have a maker friend that you trust, then come join us inside the community and ask in there. Not because you need anybody else's permission, but simply because maybe there's someone who's already been there before who can say, hey, just so you know, when I did this, here's what happened. Or have you thought about what might change if you? Might not give you a definitive answer, but it'll just give you more information to make the best decision for yourself. Cause and effect thinking from people with real experience is, of course, genuinely useful. And it might just save you some time or headaches from things that you didn't see coming otherwise. But at the end of the day, after you've thought it through, maybe talked it through, it's okay to just try it. And it's okay to change back if when you try it, it doesn't work. It really is. Think of how frequently the price of gas changes, or milk for that matter. The worst case scenario is usually that something doesn't work. But just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean it's not going to work the second time or the third time. In fact, many of you probably don't realize that the first time I ever hosted a cohort of the Makers Photography Styling System, only 3 people signed up. Maybe that's surprising because you've heard me talk about the fact that we get almost 60 students in the course anytime we run it. 3 is a lot less than 60, let me tell you. But after that first time, I learned a lot of things. And I tried something else. And I tested it, and it worked a little bit better. And then I tried something else, and it worked a bit better again. And as we've already established, that's just how this whole thing works anyway. You don't need my permission, my friends. You never did. It is your business or a side hustle. It's your work, it's your art, it's your life, and at the end of the day, it's your decision. So just go try the thing. All right? Now, I'm keeping this episode short and sweet today because, honestly, I really need to go prepare to leave for NCECA in, 3-4 days from now? Yeah, there's a lot going on. So, this actually brings me to something important. If you are not that this whole thing wasn't important, but a reminder, I should say. If you are not on our email newsletter list, first of all, rude. Why not? Just kidding. But seriously, come join us. You can visit makersplaybook.com/newsletter to sign up. Anytime we have something fun and new happening with the Makers Playbook, the newsletter is the first place, right after the community, to hear all about it. But second, if you are not on the email newsletter, it means that you did not hear about the fact that I'm bringing free stickers to hand out at NCECA next week. I have 200 of them, which felt like a lot when I ordered them. And now that I'm thinking about the fact that there's over, 6,000 potters that usually descend upon the conference, maybe it's not that many. I'm not certain. All this to say, come find me as quickly as you can at NCECA. Obviously, look for my curly red hair. I'm told it's pretty easy to spot in a crowd, minus the fact that I am quite short, so you might have to look around a few things. And of course, the stickers, if you're curious, they have our tagline of the show on them. Because together, we've got this. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Makers Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.